The global trading system is entering a turbulent phase. First, there were disagreements over export licenses and market access, but now Europe's entire economic structure is virtually on the brink of collapse. Europe's access to rare earths, to semiconductors, and even agricultural goods are now at stake due to growing tensions between Brussels and Beijing. This is no longer just a trade story, this is the geopolitical reckoning for the EU. Let's start with rare earth first. By the way, I just uploaded an entire video here on my channel on the new energy war. It is a very detailed video. For those who are interested, I will link it in the description below. You're highly, highly recommended to watch it next. It is very important to understand that from electric vehicles to wind turbines, critical minerals that are imported from China power Europe's green ambitions. European Commission Vice President Maros Šefčovič confirmed that Beijing's one-year suspension of export restrictions would apply equally to the EU and the United States. And on paper, it sounds great. It sounds like a gesture of fairness, but in practice, it underscores China's control over the terms of access. And on top of it, it reflects an exception that was granted at Beijing's discretion. So clearly, Beijing holds the cards. The European Union now finds itself in a very tough position. Brussels is even considering in-kind tariffs on China, which is a very creative and very controversial idea that would require some Chinese exporters to contribute critical raw materials directly into EU stockpiles. The EU even considers export restrictions on China if its diplomacy fails, and this is according to the mainstream media in Europe. And it sounds quite ambitious, of course, if you ask me, but why would China allow itself to be coerced? That is a good question to answer. Even EU's AI ambitions depend on Chinese imports. China's rare earth export controls will inevitably impact and slow down Europe's Apply AI initiatives, prompting delays in innovation and AI diffusion, an analyst writes. The Commission is also advancing its RESourceEU plan, and this is a strategy to reduce dependence on Chinese minerals, to boost domestic processing, and to secure long-term supplies. But while the EU plots independence, it also faces immense pressure from two superpowers playing a far rougher game. The United States is desperately trying to re-engineer supply chains to cut China out. We've heard that many times. Besant recently commented on it. China, in turn, is now using its dominance over raw materials as leverage, as it should, of course, as any country would. And Europe is caught in between. It is the semiconductor sector where the squeeze becomes very painfully clear. The case of Nexperia, a Dutch chip manufacturer that is owned by China's Wingtech, has exploded into a diplomatic crisis. When the Netherlands seized Nexperia, allegedly on national security grounds, Beijing hit back with trade restrictions. And within days of China's retaliation, factories such as Volkswagen and other European automakers that rely on Chinese chips warned that they might shut down within days. They can't operate without those components. The truth is unavoidable, in other words. Europe's semiconductor ecosystem is deeply entangled with both China and the United States. On one side, Washington demands alignment with its tax sanctions, and on the other, Beijing retaliates against any clear hostility. Europe's strategic autonomy, as they love to refer to it, so often declared in speeches by Ursula von der Leyen and other EU political elites, it looks fragile when chip supplies can be switched off overnight. And in reality, it is quite clear that there's no EU autonomy, just as there is arguably very little sovereignty left. There are so many examples, but here's the most recent one of how much of a vassal the EU has become. Bloomberg just reported that EU leaders are skipping Latin American summit because they're afraid of irritating Trump, believe it or not. Beyond industry and technology, these trade tensions are spreading to Europe's agriculture sector. Washington's new anti-dumping tariffs on Italian pasta, for example, on pecorino and olive oil, have infuriated Rome. The EU currently has a €2 billion trade surplus with Mercosur, but the reality is that global trade no longer functions on surplus and deficit calculations alone. It operates on leverage, on dependencies, and of course on strategic alignment. If we zoom out for a second, the pattern becomes quite clear. Rare earth, semiconductors, and agriculture are not isolated disputes. They are symptoms of a deeper realignment, of a deeper political realignment. Europe is very much a part of the US-China rivalry these days, and neutrality is not an option for it, in spite of its own interests, of course. The question isn't whether the EU will take sides, because it has already to a degree, but how it can assert its own interest if it finally finds at least some political will to do so. The United States has made its intentions very, very explicit in this regard. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent recently declared that America would eliminate dependence on Chinese rare earth within 2 years. He specifically said 2 years. I'm actually of an opinion that it is wishful thinking. By the way, I posted the video of Bessent saying that over on my Telegram. I'm very active there, so make sure that you are subscribed for current updates. I upload various updates throughout the day. But Europe, with its major economies being on a downward spiral, faces a strategic moment of truth at this point. The EU's upcoming decisions on tariffs, stockpiling, and on cross-border investments will reveal just how much sovereignty it still has left, if any at all. And in the industrial age, nations competed for land and resources, but in our digital age, nations compete over time to innovate, time to adapt, time to secure what others might weaponize. And so in this regard, the EU is in a very, very difficult position. China is building entire ecosystems around rare earth and chips. The United States is now trying to compete with China to make deals with allies and to give subsidies to the private sector in order to outpace China. Of course, that is decades and decades away, but still there is a clear competition between China and the United States, the great power competition between the two nations in many, many different realms, and energy is clearly one of them. Thank you so much for watching. Remember to show your support, like, subscribe, and share. Join me on Telegram. It's linked in the description below. And I will see you back here tomorrow. Enjoy the rest of your day. Take care.